Hello and welcome to today's panel on navigating economic uncertainty, hosted by George Mason University's Center for Retail Transformation and sponsored by Microsoft. My name is Dr. Gautam Vadkepat. I'm an associate professor and the director for the Center for Retail Transformation. As part of our efforts to highlight the transformation in retail, I'm delighted to host this very timely roundtable on short and longer term consumer trends and how retailers can adopt their strategies to respond to these consumer changes. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please use our Q&A session to post your questions. The chat is open if you want to comment on things, or please feel free to use the chat as well. Now, without further ado, let's meet our esteemed panelists who have graciously made time to participate and share the experiences and expertise. So maybe we'll go around the room alphabetically to kick things off. David.
Hi, thanks for having me. David Leibowitz with Microsoft. So after a long career in retail and consumer goods, I find myself with a technology company leading a team focused on challenges and opportunities first in industry for some of the largest brands on the planet.
Welcome, David. Moving down further. Georgina.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm CEO and founder of TruRating. So we are disrupting the retail customer experience space. We hear from, on average, 80% of in-store consumers in real time. And have had 400 million pieces of feedback to date. And I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for being here, Georgina. Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg Buzek, president of IHL Group. We are an analyst firm looking at retail and hospitality. And so it's my job to ingest all the regional and global data on retail and what the numbers say, not just what the press says it is.
Looking forward to that. Lisa.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Lisa Kinney. I work at Albertsons. I lead their customer and market intelligence capability for the organization, supporting the entire enterprise across research, data, segmentation, you name it. So excited to be here. I'll do a quick disclaimer that anything that I speak to today will be about the industry and not specific to Albertsons. And I look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful and perfect. We are at the industry level. The conversation will be at the industry level. So look forward to it. And perhaps we can start off, right? That's a really nice segue into the first set of questions. Now, inflation in the US has reached its highest in more than 40 years, right? This has affected cost of living. And it's no surprise that Statistica found that, I think 44% of our people said that, inflation is one of the biggest issues that consumers are dealing with. So you're the experts here. We just had retail numbers come out. You're the experts here. Just give us your quick take on what you are watching from a consumer behavior perspective.
You're starting with me, right, Gautam?
Yes, Lisa,
yes.
Starting with you.
So, I think it's a great question. I start with just saying that 40 to 45% of consumers, regardless of their income levels, are very to extremely concerned. So I always want to preface by saying that it's inflation impacts everyone. Of course, my dogs are going to start barking now. But I think that the first thing that we're looking at in the industry is really format shifting. So what we're seeing right now is a lot of shifts for some products and categories to value retailers. And we need to remind ourselves that back in 2008, the value formats are nothing like what they are today. So for those that have been in the industry long enough, I think that we may underestimate the services and offerings that value retailers are giving consumers today. I would also say that the other trend that is going to be important to keep an eye on is deflation. So we're talking a lot about inflation right now, but next year is going to be a very interesting year as retailers try to accommodate deflationary things that are going to drive AIV much lower. So I think that right now it's about the channel and understanding where customers are getting their needs met. You may not see it in the numbers every day, but there are slight shifts happening, and we need to be very mindful of what customers are doing with the value retailers.
We'll talk about the slight shifts in a second, and I'm really curious about the 2023 and onwards part of things. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But then, like, moving down, like, Greg, what are the things that you're watching for?
Yeah, I think the thing that is most shocking to me is although we release data on a monthly basis from a government standpoint, that data is no longer relevant to what's really going on. In fact, Georgina probably has better data right now than most anybody because she's got that real-time consumer data. And what we're seeing is there's a big difference between the haves and the have-nots. The haves are spending on eating out, going on trips, still spending a lot of money on travel and getting out from that COVID lockdown. The have-nots are generally people that relied on that government stimulus money that dried up a year ago. And we're facing some really rough comparisons right now. And the retail numbers came out today, this morning, and it shows year to year retail sales are up 10.7%. Sounds like good news. It shows groceries up 8%. But in real terms, when you put inflation on top of that, and I still honestly think the inflation number, CPI, when it comes to groceries is well under what it really is in people's market baskets. Groceries down 5.5%, not up 8%, because we're looking at 13.5% inflation there. But if you look at all the factors, all the things that people really buy in a grocery basket, the chicken, the corn, the vegetables, all that stuff, many of that is up 20-30% there. So the haves and the have-nots are hurting. They are making decisions now between medicine and food, and they're trading down as far as they can for things. The haves, it's an inconvenience type of thing, but that is changing dramatically, and it's changing much faster than the government data is reporting. And that's concerning because of the Fed and everything else.
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying that the haves are also getting concerned with inflation now, and
they're concerned, but it's more of an inconvenience right now than it is making a decision between whether we eat or get medicines. That a lot of the have-nots are having to make that decision.
Yeah, it's about the essentials.
Yeah,
excellent. And Georgina, Greg actually put a nice pitch in for you and the data that you're sitting on. So, what is your data telling from what's the pain the consumers are feeling right now?
Yeah, Greg will be happy to hear it. Very much boosters his assumptions. We interestingly, again, obviously, high levels of awareness. On average, 2/3 of consumers are noticing the rising cost in living. And obviously it's, we can't escape it in headlines. And I've noticed smaller portions in my local restaurant and things. But I think as well as the haves and have-nots, I think what's a interesting split is age bands, actually. So when we look at consumers, retailers who really target, Gen Z, the more affluent under 30s groups in terms of global sports brands and fashion, etc., versus those retailers who really target the seniors and families, we notice there's quite a big discrepancy. And it's those under 30s which aren't getting so impacted by rising fuel costs, household bills, energy, and rising food costs. And we're seeing them take less changes in their day-to-day behavior on a result of that. So we asked some specific targeted questions over August. Around 6,000 consumers responded, and just asking how their behaviors have changed. And so you've got 65% of that older group saying that they have changed their behavior, versus only 50% in that younger Gen Z under 30 group. And when you look at how they've changed their behavior, it's things like, driving less. The older generation are making real market market-less routes. And I guess that could very much impact retailers who rely on people coming to them by private transport. And things like making a grocery list. We've seen a 10% hike in consumers going in and writing the list of their purchases, which, academic research has shown that decreases your final bill by about 15% because you're less likely to make those impulsive purchases. And also a 10% increase in people saying they shop around before making a big purchase. So definitely we're seeing that more thoughtful, discretionary purchasing behavior.
First, I love the fact that you put in academic research there. Kudos. Right. But it's also interesting that the differences between retailers and how, it's not like one stroke, you can paint the picture. You have to consider the nuances. And we'll get into the nuances a little bit. But David, what are you watching closely?
Yeah, so I'd agree with all the comments so far, and essentially this focus shift between what was hot during the pandemic. It's a shift not just in the demographics, but also a shift in the product categories from non-discretionary to discretionary. So those hot items, people were staying at home, buying more furniture, home furnishings items. Peloton was a hot brand. The bread making machines, the pasta machines, and you get to a point, television, electronics, the streaming devices, but you get to a point where you've saturated your home with enough TVs, and how many pasta making machines do you need? So those are the categories that are now on the decline. If you look at the Bureau of Labor reporting for frontline worker, retail is still up in terms of retailers are still looking to hire. Except there was a slight decline in furniture frontline retail. Retailers are reacting. All public news, so nothing kind of privileged here, but Walmart and Target have, when they look at the discretionary items like apparel, they are canceling some of their orders. I'd agree. I call it, when you say they have to have, I call it the tale of two cities, because the other side is the affluent shopper is still buying. Saks conducted their own survey. Households over $200,000 are still spending, and 75% of those have said they will continue to spend at the current rate for the next 3 months. And so it's interesting is, UPS is hiring 100,000 workers this season for transportation and warehouse. So maybe they know something we don't. And on the flip side, the cosmetics and fragrances are up. Why is that? Up to 20%. People are getting out. They're doing different things. They're celebrating birthdays and holidays and so on. So there's been this shift now. And I'd agree. It's a challenge for those who are belt tightening, and then those that are, will just continue to spend with less thought.
So love this idea of tale of two cities, right? The haves and the have-nots. Any other consumer trends you've seen people being thoughtful, lesser number of shopping trips? Depends obviously on the category as well as the type of retailers. Lisa, you talked about being mindful of smaller and minuscule shifts that's happening. Any of those shifts that we want to kind of touch upon in the next 2 or 3 minutes? Open to all at this point.
Well, I think I'll start with the one thing that is so very true is fuel pricing has a direct correlation to shopping behavior. So what we saw when fuel prices were high is retailers that had a really strong footprint close to neighborhoods benefited considerably, right? And it was a relief for many retailers in that we knew that was the case during COVID, right? People just kind of went, whoever had the strongest footprint typically did very well. If you have to drive to a mass or a club retailer, you start doing the math and you're like, well, wait a minute, I'm spending $10 in fuel to save $10 on groceries. Is this really worth the inconvenience? What you see as soon as fuel prices went down, and there's some relief there, that's when you start seeing people shopping 5 to 6 different retailers again. And it's very interesting when we look at trends. There are very distinct customer segments that behave very differently, even within the same income level. For example, you may have someone, for example, on government assistance, and we think maybe own brands is the right solution for them. In fact, when we talk to them, they don't want to risk spending money, even if it's $1 cheaper on a box of cereal that they're not sure their kids will eat. So they are far more inclined to actually just go to an EDLP retailer. They know the price is going to be consistent. They know that, it's a brand they trust. And on the flip side, there are people who love that deal seeking, get the best deal. They will invest a ton of time and energy to do that. But so the fuel pricing piece is definitely plays a huge role in traffic patterns and shopping behaviors. And then the last piece that I'll speak to is when we do study consumers and we ask them, what are you doing, to manage your household budgets? What specifically are you doing? And the clothing, the clothing and apparel was the #1 thing cited. So yes, grocery shopping and economizing and saving money on your grocery bill is one coin, but the other side of that coin is there's other ways, like we're no longer paying somebody to cut our grass. Some categories, like I'm not eating dessert as much as I used to. I'm not buying the $50 bottle of wine. Even those that are wealthy are saying, I'm trading down a little bit on some of these categories, or I'm just not having the filet mignon, every week. I'm just spreading it out and having it every other week. So when we talk about trade down, that means something very different for different customer segments. So my role is always to help companies avoid too many generalizations and make sure that we're looking at the trend of the customer that we are placing our bets to win with in the future. Chase that trend. You can't chase them all and you can't fix them all. But pick the one that you want to actually solve for based on who your core customer is.
Perfect. Any other thoughts?
Yeah. So Gotham, related to the fuel that Lisa talked about in terms of the gas prices, it's about $2 billion for every penny difference in fuel prices over a year's period in the U.S. economy. So we estimate about $400 billion was lost to discretionary income that went into fuel for the last year for retail. So as that comes down, more money is certainly available, but we're still up considerably from where we were a year ago. And so when you look at those year-to-year comparisons, that comes into play. I think looking forward to this fourth quarter and the holiday spending in particular, I'm concerned about the heating oil and the electricity prices, the utility side of it, not just the fuel prices. The gas prices can come down, but people have to heat their homes. And now with the worldwide factors related to what's going on with the Ukraine conflict and the fuel things for Europe and the US, we're seeing rapid 20-30% rise there as well. So that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, and to add on that, some of the research that I saw was up to 20 million Americans were behind on their utility bills through the summer, which was the highest ever. And of course, that then lends itself to less being able to be spent on discretionary funding, discretionary spend. So it's definitely challenged with hopefully we see some relief towards the end of the year.
Georgina, any last thoughts on this point?
Yeah, that's
okay. Perfect. So we'll move on. So we've talked about category shifting behavior, the focus on essentials, how gas prices play a big role. Now and the shifting idea of value, right? Like let's just move on to what there's actually a bunch of questions in the chat as well. Let's move on to kind of looking at what can retailers do in the short term to manage some of these stresses. Any thoughts on that very specific question? Let's start at the very broad level, quickly get a viewpoint, and then I'll ask each of you very specific questions on this topic. Any initial reactions?
Yeah,
So,
I think
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'll jump in first. Just economically is really the deployment of technology. One of the limiting factors, there's two limiting factors right now that we're seeing in retail. One is inventory availability and visibility. The stuff that even makes it to the store doesn't get to the shelf there. Do they have enough employees to do that? And it's all these self-service technologies and IoT technologies that are in there because they don't have enough people to do that. We saw an 843% increase in the use of electronic shelf labels because my local store here, Supercenter, they don't have enough employees there to change the prices. So you go to ring up and the price is wrong on things, and that's coming back in a big way. So those digital signage, self-checkout, those kind of devices to reduce the labor footprint for things there is a big deal. But increasingly, we're seeing the inventory accuracy piece of it be critical to the consumer response and the consumer trend at the local level.
That's a great start. Managing inventory. David, you were about to say something.
Yeah, just quick. So 5 just high level items. So we look at going back to the tale of two cities and how consumers will spend, looking at things like strategic revenue management, right? Monitoring the P&L for the products. We've worked with brands that are looking at identifying what are those zombie brands, the ones it's time to eliminate. I'll echo what Greg said, inventory management, make sure they don't have that glut of inventory, make sure that they got the right supply. For those items, it's number 3, pricing and promotion management, right? How do we entice those consumers to buy the right items at the right price? Fourth, buy now, pay later. So we have to think about giving consumers and other additional ways to stretch that spend. And then the fourth, more of a strategy, CPGs partnering with retailers and vice versa, sharing that demand signal, product activity. They have to be partnering together to understand that consumer signal, intent signal, so they can react further upstream to the supply.
Wow, I run out of space taking notes. Okay, Lisa, do you have any thoughts, high-level thoughts on how retailers can manage?
I think David and Greg covered a lot of the basics. So I always kind of say, like, hey guys, let's go back to the basics. Let's make sure that we're doing the foundational stuff right. And so that's first and foremost. And I think that there was already a great conversation around that. What I have found interesting is, as retailers are moving to branded credit cards or those types of services. And I look at, during the pandemic, consumers, what's the stat? They paid off a record $83 billion in credit card debt during the pandemic. But credit card balances have risen $52 billion in the fourth quarter of 2021. It's on track to surpass pre-pandemic levels and hit an all-time record. So I'm not sure if we hit that this summer or not, but it was pretty close. So, there is an advantage there potentially for retailers that have financial services part of their model for either alternative revenue or simply to create a different value equation for customers as they're looking for, where can they hedge their bets and, afford their electric bill versus afford their groceries this month. So that's another interesting element to this whole value mix that we're talking about.
Yeah, and so this goes to questions, right? Do we see buy now, pay later increase? It looks like the consensus is that, that can actually help manage, especially those who don't have it, to in some extent at least, that financial burden that they're dealing with right now. Georgina, you've got a lot of data, right? That you, almost poll every day. So what are you seeing, what are consumers demanding of retailers, right? What are the things that they're looking for in these times?
Well, I guess when we're obviously collecting data throughout COVID online, and then as stores began to open up as well. And it was interesting really trying to look at look at loyalty. What is making certain consumers choose certain retailers in these times of economic hardship? And what we found out that those retailers who were, looking to do heavy price discounts, who were really pushing the discounts associated with their loyalty schemes, it only actually influenced 54% of consumers. And actually, what really drove loyalty was emotional connection to that brand. And 77% said that they would choose a retailer based on shared values. And I think that's really key. When we look in these times of, inflation and tighter wallet spend and these kinds of pressures, I don't think it's all about just immediately turning to the, to the cost cutting on staff or deep discounts. It's actually, consumers are still, they're being thoughtful, they're being more careful, there's less impulsive purchases and decisions. But that really means that you as a retailer need to focus on your USP and how you speak to that consumer and build emotional loyalty. And that would be, one of my main recommendations.
That's awesome. Can we just go around the room, right? Like, so we talked about the cost measures, but then we brought up this consumer connection kind of an angle, the emotional connection, as you called it, Georgina. How do retailers build that in this highly stressful environment? Any thoughts? Again, opening it up to the room. We'll take a couple of thoughts, because that's a fantastic point that I didn't think of.
Well, I think about it every day. It's part of, it's, I live and breathe it. And I think, there's an element of trust and consistency, right? So there is definitely, and I actually had that later on in some of the thoughts that I had on this track was about, having a purpose, if you're a purpose-driven organization, and instead of asking, how can I get somebody to do this behavior? I hear that a lot. How do I get this customer to do X, Y, Z? How do I get them to shop with me? And instead, when you start changing the narrative that says, how can I do more for, to win the love of the customers who love me today? So there's some retailers, in industries that get it well, which is love the ones you're with and, reward them for that. And then there's the others that are chasing the trend, right? How do I get them to, get this customer to do this with me? And I think that there's a trust and consistency component for shopping. There is also, I'm going to say this is a generalization, but nobody wants to work hard to feel like they're getting a good price. I don't care what income spectrum we're on. If you take yourself as a human being, does anybody want to feel like they're paying more than they need to for a product or service? I don't think any of us do. So there's an element of like, make it easy to get the products and services I love at a good price. Yes, there are going to be deal seeking behaviors, and that's just part of we're humans, so we're selling products to human beings. So thinking about it through that lens is super important. And I think they want to just know that they're going to be rewarded for their loyalty. Like, I want to know that that I'm loyal to you and that I'm spending a lot of my money with you. So I want you as a retailer to acknowledge that and do something special for me. And it often is not, and I know we'll talk about that later on price perception. Sometimes it's not getting, 80% lean ground beef at 99 cents a pound, right? Yep. So I just think we have to be mindful of that.
Excellent. I love the fact that you just said, like, you don't have to work hard to think that you're getting a good deal, right? That's me. That epitomizes me perfectly. And I think most of us. I'm going to ask a few specific questions now, right? We have two technologists on on the session here, Greg and David. Let's talk about a little bit of the technology aspect of things and what can be deployed to help, reduce some of the burdens that we're seeing these days. People have said technology plays a deflationary role. So can you talk a little bit about those? And maybe David, you can kick us off, and Greg, you can go next.
Sure. Well, so Greg had mentioned some kind of in-store technology like IoT. I almost like expand on what Lisa said, because I think it drives to the core of almost when we talk about personalization, right? And instead of product personalization, it is with this emotional connection, it is brand personalization. And so, that can be done with a variety of, omnipresent technologies, ensuring that content is delivered to me, like personal messaging, right? That is delivered in an ecosystem of marketing channels, whether I'm in store, whether I'm online, whether it's email, whether they are potentially pop-up notifications, whether, and I'm in store. So it's interacting with some of that technology on their own, say, ESL, IoT, those are just single point solutions, but they all have to work together in harmony. So they understand me and drive that personal emotional connection wherever I am. So I think that would be we want to think about technology as an enabling layer, but it should be an entire platform, not just niche solutions.
Love it. That's perfect. Greg?
Yeah, I think tied to that, I mean, this really isn't sexy and customer facing necessarily, but it can be, is the use of the, I guess, the graduated analytics side of things. We've gone from descriptive, what happened, now we're moving very, very fast to prescriptive. This is what you should change, and let me change it for you. The system can do that. We're seeing that across everything from loss prevention to, all the way down to, store performance, employee performance, et cetera, related to that. There's all these store level solutions, but by far the number one thing when it comes to a store, it's got to be inventory and inventory accuracy and inventory availability. People come to local retailers outside of grocery because they need it now. What they need it now. And increasingly, we are seeing people not be in stock for a variety of different reasons. And that's crazy, because we've got a study coming out this next week that looked at the trust of your local retailer to be in stock. And has your trust in your local retailer increased or decreased in the last 2 years, based on whether they have what you want to buy? And it's anywhere from 4 times to 35 times higher that my trust decreased in my local retailer in the last 2 years. The highest level of increase was in your mass merchant warehouse club side. Guess what Amazon's was? 32%. 7.4% increase is the highest of physical retailer, but in Amazon it was 32% trust that they would have what I wanted to buy. Add to that 2 things. 80% of US consumers are now Prime members, and we spend between 16 to 20% of what we buy at a local store we didn't intend to buy when we walked in there. It's an impulse item.
Yeah.
So as that is my bigger concern, and that's why the inventory accuracy is by far the number one thing. And the second piece of that, the second thing that I think of is, like David talked about, personalization, and Lisa talked about that you care that I shopped at your store today. Mm-hmm. I mean, could you imagine that once a quarter, once every 4 months, a note came from the local store manager for where you shopped that just said, thank you for shopping at our stores? The impact that has on loyalty and customer awareness. We don't do that in most retail segments. My son had his car serviced. I've gotten like 8 different emails, way too many, from different people within the organization thanking me for having the car serviced at different things. That's way too much. But in most retail environments, we don't get any thank you whatsoever for shopping at their store. And I think that's a personal touch thing that is I mean, people want to know they matter and that their loyalty matters.
I agree with that. I'm still waiting for that email to say thank you for shopping. Moving on, so we got a question on the technology space, right? Like, is technology actually companies have cut short? What's the trade-off between technology? Will technology override issues of shrinkage, right, when it comes to scan and go? Any thoughts on this issue? Wegmans, the person quotes Wegmans saying that it's canceled it out. Any thoughts on this idea of, can technology actually overcome shrinkage?
Does anybody else? I mean, I'll jump in. There's a very public article about Wegmans pulling their scan and go technology. Yep. There. The challenge, I believe, and I'm not personally familiar with that, but I think they put it out as a result of COVID, so it went to a very wide audience, to everybody. I am telling you, my favorite thing in the industry is Sam's Scan and Go. Mm-hmm. I can get in and out of Sam's in 2 minutes if I know exactly the 3 items that I want to buy. Yep. But I'm a member. I paid to have access to that. I've got that. If retailers are able to do that, what we saw is that retailers that enabled Scan and Go saw 81% higher sales growth than those that didn't. But you can't just give it to everybody. You've got to be smart about it. Absolutely. And that's where it's got to play.
Okay,
I
moving
agree,
on.
Greg. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry, Lisa. We'll just
Okay.
move on just to keep it. I just looked at time and like, oh, there are a lot of things to cover. So Lisa, you had talked about in the teaser video kind of this notion of value, perceptions of value, and so forth. And how do retailers actually stay in touch and deliver on that value? Kind of started alluding to it in your earlier conversation. Can you just dwell a little bit more, maybe a minute on this point?
I talk about a little bit I call it the hierarchy of needs. That's a balance between, make it easy for me, make it affordable, you know what I mean? And, give me great quality and the importance of those, universal needs we all have differs for different people, right? So when we talk about value, here's an analogy. It may not be I'm going to call out a brand. It might not be Chef Boyardee that you need to be at 99 cents. You know what I mean? Which I don't even know if that would be an accurate price point, or chicken nuggets, right? We have to think about what are the product. Your loyal customers will notice your price changes before anyone else. They're in our stores or in any retailer stores many times a week. So if we think, and if a retailer thinks that like they're already in our stores, we don't need to worry about it, we're delusional. So that's first and foremost. And then the second piece is, if it's a highly predictable, meaning I buy this product, I buy Starbucks pods every 2 weeks, you know what I mean? I know the price, whether I'm in one income bracket or another. I know that it's $8.99. And if all of a sudden a week later it's $10.99, even though we think that, Starbucks K-cups are not price sensitive, we tend to define super sensitive or price sensitive items to be the entry price point item in a category. And I think that's a mistake. I really do. I think that this notion of I can get away with taking pricing on these items to cover the cost of the other is a way too simplistic way of looking at value. The other thing I would say is, this is table stake basic stuff. Simplify promotions. You don't want, it's this price if it's on a Tuesday, if it's raining and you scan with this app, and, so make it easy, right, to get good value. I think the other thing is, let's think about our stores. Okay. And the trade areas that we're operating within. Are we optimizing our stores? Are we looking at our end caps and putting the right products that articulate value in the right way? Not every end cap should look the same across, retailers that have a large geographic footprint. So those are just a few things. Sometimes, like I said, it's not about the chicken nuggets or canned pasta.
Excellent. Georgina, a question for you, right? You have deployed point of sale customer feedback. So how can retailers in this really tough environment incorporate feedback into trying to build that emotional connection that you talked about, and also delivering on the value that Lisa was just talking about? Any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think, a lot of our discussing, wide industry trends, but what really matters for the retailer is happening in their stores. And as Lisa just said, each store is a snowflake in their own geographical area with their own market of certain consumers, of certain demographic. And I think if anything's taught us anything over the last 3 years, it's just like coming in and out of the pandemic, and then what we're facing with inflation. It's consumers are changing their expectations, their needs at a rapid pace. And yeah, I personally are on a rampage to change the customer feedback which retailers currently get. The status quo is, on average, they'll hear from 1 or 2% via a receipt-based survey. And it's the people who, want to get put into that free prize draw. On that really end of the scale, the really angry people, or the really happy. And it's just simply not representative. Those people fall into the same socio-demographic, the same personality types, etc. And so, I really believe that these times are change, and it's just going to continue. The retailers have to be on top of their consumers. They have to be in continual dialogue. They have to be understanding what are those changes in value perception? How do those differ across our geography and our store spread? And, with our solution, we ask a customer every single time they pay, whether it's via their phone or on a terminal or online. And just by adopting one single question, we're all happy to answer a question, 1 second, and then it moves on. But the questions rotate, and we link anonymously back to what's in people's baskets, how often they come back. And so really bringing up that wealth of data for a retailer, which they can take immediate action on. Shameless plug, but not really, because it's
and this was to Lisa's point about all. I think Lisa also, when she and I had chatted in preparation, right? Stay away from averages because they don't tell the whole story. You got to actually capture everything, especially if you're capturing the extremes. There's a problem there as well. So fantastic. Moving on, keeping up beyond time. This is probably like we're gearing up for holiday season. Any one tip that you can give the retailers in the audience to prepare for this holiday season? And maybe David, we'll start off with you in this session.
Sure. Maybe I'll ask the guy who's cleaning my windows right now. He might have a point of view. Yeah, welcome to working remotely. When I think of holidays, I actually think first about returns, because returns during the year, it's typically about on average 20% for retail, 40% for apparel. We think about even, up to 50% of items are returned because of size. So it's going to be hard to solve that in the short term. Here are some things that we're seeing. First, analog models. Some retailers are just adding friction to the returns process, right? Why are customers ordering small, medium, or medium and large? Because the home has become the try-on booth, right? They're not going to the store, so they're buying both items in multiple sizes and sending back. But if they can add some friction, unfortunately, say to the cost of returning the item with the fee, that's one item. Some other, e-commerce and apparel retailers have interesting fit technology, just plugins. Oh, you wear this brand in this size, focus group of one. There are some apparel sites that I frequent. 99% of the time, those are accurate for me, trying on a new brand, if they're able to identify other sizing. Near future, AR technology. So, Walmart acquired an AR company that allows you to virtually try on glasses, right? They also have some similar tech that they've just launched this year around even apparel, where customers can upload their own photos and see what that item will look like on their body, and their shape and their skin tone. I think as that tech evolves, it could be a game changer to reduce the problem further upstream rather than downstream in the returns.
So, Georgina, any thoughts that you have, like what should retailers gear up for? So returns management and some solutions David talked about. Anything else you want to add to this conversation on?
Yeah, I guess it's just the trends we see over every holiday season in our data. We've been measuring consumer experience in store for the last few years, and stores get busier, staff get under pressure, and standards drop. And I think this year maybe we'll see consumers are less accepting of not being able to find someone on the floor to get help, a store being badly stocked or not clean. And so I guess the one piece of advice would be, be on top of that compliance and find a way to measure it and take action in real time.
I love this. Expectations are increasing from customers about what standards are in-store standards are. I love that point. Lisa, do you have any tips for the retailers as they gear up for holiday season?
I think that plan on early shopping, right? So I think that there's still a little bit of it was happened during COVID, and we saw that actually play out last year, where it was the insanity of trying to find the basics and feel comfortable that it's going to be in stock drove a lot of angst. I think that's still going to have some trickle effect this year as well, for different reasons. So I think that the consumers will want to lock in and make sure that they have the turkey, that they have that the basics for meal planning are taken care of. And with that being said, then I also just it would be naive to think that if I've been going to the same retailer to feed my family Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, I'm going to want to go back there. And I that's probably where I'm going to want to fulfill next holiday's needs, right? If I'm loyal to that particular retailer. So if you have the data and you know who shopped with you last year and how they shopped with you and what they bought, now would be the time to start talking to them. There's lots of ways to pre-order, to hold, to say, we've got your supply, we have what you need. And so I think that there's an advantage there if retailers can talk to their customers that way.
The importance of data, right? First party data. Again, Greg, what's your tip for the retailers?
Well, I think consumers are going to be far more practical this season than they have been in the past. And if you've got a lot of frivolous merchandise, there, good chance that that's not going to sell real well. I think you're going to see a major increase in gift cards related to gift giving as well. And thus you got to be on the lookout for gift card fraud, which is a huge, huge issue there. The category that I'm most concerned about is electronics, because like David said, we've all bought the TVs and everything else during the COVID time period. And, the big announcement, the iPhone 14, it looks to be somewhat underwhelming from what everybody had hoped for and expected there. And that has driven a lot of buying behavior in electronics in the past several years for things. So, furniture is going to not be another tough category with housing dropping, with inflation going up there. So I think practical items will do extremely well. Do you have the inventory of that versus the inventory of the non-practical, the gift, the tchotchke type gifts that you give to Uncle Albert, those kind of things I think are going to have a hard time this Christmas season.
Excellent. I looked at the time and I'm going to be the taskmaster. So moving us on to the longer term things, right? So we've talked a lot about the short term pressures from consumers. Let's switch gears to the longer term trends that you're seeing. And David, you in our teaser video kind of raised a point that I've been raising a lot. And I love this, which is that, there's a drive for convenience, but as you increase the convenience option, you might be losing out on impulse purchase. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
You're absolutely right. So kicked off during COVID, it was an imperative for retailers to drive towards solutions like buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup. Those might have been kind of midterm aspirations. They became must-haves for retailers. And now that a lot of that behavior has stuck, and they want to be able to have the quick pickup, or they want to have items delivered quickly, but it's a double-edged sword. So it's helpful for retailers. Can you help me plan my basket ahead of time? They can also potentially adjust to those labor shortages if they're focusing that labor on just fulfillment. But the other hand, we talked about the shopping list, whether that shopping list is for buy online and pick up at the curbside, customers just picking from that curated list, right? And if that impulse purchase historically is anywhere between 15 to 20%. We lose that in the face. Well, the retailer loses that in the face of efficiency, picking up from curbside, drop off in the trunk. And so retailers want this. It's a split desire between meeting the customer need and also how do they offer that experiential retail, the browsing, the dwell time, the instance of surprise and delight throughout the store, education, discovery of new product introduction. So that's the tension.
And how do they do that, David? Like put you on the spot. Any quick thoughts on what they can do?
Well, if you look, so historically, some of the discount retailers, they've had this concept, before buy online, they have the concept of the treasure hunt. How do you take the concept of the treasure hunt and focus that in other areas of retail? They need some, similar effective strategies to drive stickiness. We've seen some like spot promotions at retailers where it's like, using AR, MR technology instead of just the blue dot to find the item, but perhaps the treasure hunt in the store, gamify the experience. Well, the other piece is, we talked about Scan and Go. How about just, the concept of just walk out? And it doesn't work in a large big box format? Can I do it in a smaller format? Here's the reason why. When we take the monetary instrument out of it, it's almost like gambling at the casino table. When you're using funny money, or I'm not thinking about the money, when you're filling the basket, you fill it to 20% more.
That is a great point. I did not think of a great point. So I'm going to actually pivot to the next question, and Lisa, I'm going to go to you on this one, which is that, talk about some trends. We also saw, right, what that you are seeing. We saw a question being asked in the chat here about where do you see people shopping online versus in store?
Yeah.
We've seen that that's one trend that has stuck, that e-commerce grocery. I myself have started doing that, and people in the audience know that I don't actually shop online. So that's a new thing. What do you see is happening in the longer term? Do you see this trend progressing, and then how do you make that profitable also?
So specific to e-commerce, yeah. So it's interesting because for most shoppers, again, generalizations, but for most, it's not a either or, it's a both, right? So a very, very, very large percentage of e-commerce shoppers are still within grocery. That's definitely not the case in other industries, but within grocery generally are also shopping in the store. However, the trips, are changing, like the trip type, the reason behind going in store is very different now. I think that it's a new way of just shopping conveniently. Like it's just an added layer of convenience. It's an added, benefit. I don't know about you, but how many times during COVID did we say, I'm just going to run down the street to grab something? Like I never left my house. And for me, not because, regardless. So I started beginning to leverage e-commerce more out of, in that case, it was more out of necessity. And all that trial came, because of a macro event, an uncontrollable event that really drove trial to a channel that I think would have taken years within grocery industry to get to where it is now. So for that, there's a huge benefit there. I believe that the customers who have found that convenience play have adopted it and will stick. I think that there's still some headroom and new ways to make it more appealing, particularly on the fresh side, particularly on impulse and inspiration. You don't get a lot of inspiration if you browse retailer e-commerce solutions. It's not very inspiring. So when we talk about profitability, I think that there's still a struggle in the operations around e-commerce and finding ways to, the labor is very high in that space. I think that we still have to remind ourselves that when a customer converts to become omni-channel, they are actually extremely valuable. You are insulating them from a trip to another retailer. And I think retailers need to understand that and not look at the P&L specific to the channel, but look at the P&L of the customer. We don't do a lot of customer P&Ls in the industry, but we really should, because the whole profitability discussion would completely change when you were looking at the profitability of that customer rather than the service that you're providing.
I love that.
And I think the last piece would be, I think there's going to be new partnerships and new ways to make this efficient. Obviously, there's technology on micro fulfillments and all of that stuff is going to happen. But it's going to be interesting how the transportation network plays out. Even if you look at third-party delivery providers, they're finding other ways to make their company more profitable. And it's about data and media serving on their app, and So I just think it's going to be an interesting time to see what partnerships evolve. And a year from now, I think some of the labor and transportation challenges on costs are going to look different.
Excellent. Keeping us on time, we have 6 minutes to wrap things up. Greg, what's your longer term customer trend that you're looking for?
Yeah, I'm not sure this is so much customer trend as more as it is operational trend for retailers. Two big races going on right now. Lisa touched on one of them. It is getting to profitability on those digital journeys. the fulfillment there. The typical supermarket that's picking items that with their store employees and not charging a fee to deliver, they're losing up to 15 points of margin on top of, once again, lost impulse items and everything else on that. And they've got to get to a point where that is near to profitable or near to where it's a customer walking in the store. The second one is the rise of AI and machine learning. It really is a race to clean data. First one to clean data wins. Because it can, if you have clean inventory data, your forecasts are better, your inventory accuracy, your visibility is much better there. If it's clean on your employee data or your customer data, you can leverage that much faster and much more. So there's a race to that AI machine learning thing, but it's dependent on clean data. And operationally, that's the race for this huge trend because of COVID that is sticking, is because it was fun for a while. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, it's still there. And we're losing, 8 to 15 points of margin on every one of these orders. And now inflation hits and now it's even worse. We got to get that fixed. And so I don't see any slowdown in technology. In fact, I see an acceleration in technology spend by retailers.
Well, that's good news for me because, oftentimes during recession, we see people reduce technology spend, and academic studies have shown that that's counter for long-term performance. Georgina, bring us home. Like, what do you think what is the longer-term trend you're looking for? And
I guess, to bring us home, I'm just going to go back to retail basics. Fundamentally, all our perceptions of a retailer and a brand are, based on our touch points and our experience, and very much our last experience. And so, throughout the years and all the 400 million data points which we have, pointing back to the friendliness of staff in a store has been absolutely key. And how that's been, it's what consumers say are the most important things to bring them back. And it's what we've seen is really closely correlated to how much people spend and how often they return. So while we can, get really excited about all these new IoT technologies, don't forget the basics and the importance of a smile from your staff.
I love it. Customer intimacy and building the brand loyalty, right? It all starts and ends with human touch points. I think we are at the hour, on the hour. I know there's a lot of other questions I had on here that we couldn't get to, but I think this was based on the chat conversations. This has been a really insightful sessions where it talked about not just the short-term pressures that consumers are facing and how retailers can react to it. I think this might be the first session talking about holiday tips as well. And then we pivoted to the longer-term strategies, and ultimately the point being that, you have technology, but the human touch is important, and the pathway to profitability involves getting more human engagement, but leveraging technology. And finally, I'll end on this one point, which is inventory management, right? And that was a point that almost everyone here talked about. That's the key to unlocking the next level of retail numbers. So I want to thank everyone who joined us for the session, especially big thanks to the panelists for making time to join us. Sure, you can reach them out on LinkedIn and other media sources. But thank you, and we'll post this video in about a week.